Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Michael Calamari here alongside Taylor Mascetta. And now pleased to be joined by Rob Swoboda. Ron played for the Mets for 6 years, including the 1969 Miracle Mets. In addition to his time with the Mets, he also finished up his career in pinstripes with the Yankees, where he played the last 3 years of his career. Ron, thank you so much for giving up your time and joining us.
Great to be here. Your timing's impeccable. I just came back from Cooperstown, and I've been digging the Mets Yankees on MLB Extra Innings, so I'm up to speed.
Yeah, we got the perfect time, the Subway Series, the Hall of Fame, and we're going to get into all that. I want to start with the Hall of Fame and start with just Gil Hodges getting into the Hall of Fame. Obviously, you knew him very well. He was the coach during that 1969 Miracle Mets season. What was that moment like for you and to see your coach, Gil Hodges, finally get inducted into the Hall of Fame?
Well, Gil Hodges is a manager of the New York Mets in 1969. I wrote a little memoir of my time in that season. And in it, I went back and looked at all of the play-by-play sheets of the entire season. And you got to examine in detail the in-game decisions that Gil Hodges made as a manager, and they were so impeccable and spot on. He was a tough guy, and you're talking to a fella who had a kind of fractious relationship with Gil Hodges. But what was indisputable was the fact that he was in charge, on top of the game, ahead of the game, always. And in this age of analytics, you know, Hodges had his analytics upstairs, and he made all the decisions. And if you saw, you know, obviously from 1969, he made a lot of good ones.
So what was it like being back at Cooperstown and being able to reconnect with teammates and players that you played against?
The weekend was magical, Taylor. Gil Hodges' two children were there. Irene, his daughter, and Gil Jr., Gilly, we call him, were there. And Cleon Jones and his wife, and me and my wife Cecilia, and Art Shamsky was there with his good friend, and Ed Kranepool and Monica Kranepool were there. So from that 69 team, and Jay Horowitz, who handles all these alumni affairs for the New York Mets, really corralled us and sort of pointed us in the right direction, because we were part of a kind of campaign whenever someone was writing about it this year, and credit the Hall of Fame for making a process available that cleaned up, I think, a lot of discrepancies. One of which was Gil Hodges, another Minnie Minoso, Jim Cott, the pitcher from the Twins, and a lot of other teams for a lot of years. A whole bunch of guys that needed to be in the Hall of Fame got in the Hall of Fame, and we were happy the most about Gil Hodges.
Yeah, I want to take it back to that 1969, World Series team. You were able to have a great series in the World Series at the plate. I think you went 6 for 15, and obviously the famous catch in Game 4. But you had not played in the playoffs yet leading up to that series. How were you able to answer the call in the World Series after not playing in the 3 games prior to Atlanta?
That's a good question. I mean, Michael, I felt pretty rusty going into it. A series as important as maybe the only World Series you're ever going to be in your life. Baltimore had a couple of left-handed pitchers that season. And so I was going to see some action in the World Series, because Hodges was a strict platooner at several positions, one of which was right field, with me and Art Shamsky as we came down the stretch. So I knew I was going to play, but I hadn't seen game action. That's the thing that catches up to you. I got an on-deck scare, as a pinch hitter who never got in the game in the National League playoff against the Braves, but I broke it right out against the Orioles, and believe me, I felt strange and unusual taking the field in Baltimore for Game 1, where I grew up and where I played as an amateur at Memorial Stadium. So it took a little while to get into it, and most of my base hits that you mentioned were in the last 2 games that I played.
So in 2019, you wrote your memoir, Here's to Catch, a memoir of the Miracle Mets and more. just what inspired writing this, and like how long before putting it together had you wanted to write about that season?
Well, Taylor, you over the years, we were fortunate enough to come to New York to autographing shows and other sorts of appearances and things, especially around, anniversaries of that 1969 season. So we had plenty of time to talk to plenty of people about that season. But it just, I spent 20 years in local television, and you write your own copy, and you feel like you have a sense of writing. I'm a hard reader. I read a lot of stuff and all the time. And, you felt like, at some point in time, I think it was really the 50th anniversary, and I'm not a kid anymore. And it's like, you're either going to write this thing or you're going to die and it's not going to happen. And if you don't get it done by the 50th anniversary, you're going to miss a marketing opportunity. And I hate to make it sound so pecuniary, but that was kind of the thing. You've been dealing with these issues for a long time, and it was fun to go back and talk to Tom Seaver and Jerry Kuzman and Ed Kranepool and Cleon Jones, and go back and get their perspective on certain things that that happened to all of us, but everything happens from your individual perspective. So I wanted to hear their side of it and put it in the book. And actually, it's funny, Sarah Seaver, Tom's daughter, was at the Hall of Fame, and I just sent her a copy of my book because she was interested in the last chapter, which was on the Met wives, with my wife and Tom Seaver's wife, Nancy, and Nolan Ryan's wife, Ruth. They hosted the wives from those 69 guys in Texas a number of years back. And they got in touch with all of the women, and it was for them and about them. And it was a magical weekend for them. My wife couldn't come home and talk about it without getting teared up, because it meant so much to them. They did it for themselves, and they were an extraordinary bunch of women. And whether they were still married, they were casualties in that in that process, marriages that broke. And but the women went there and really experienced a reunion that meant so much to them. That's the last chapter in my book, and I liked it best.
Talking with Ron Swoboda on One-on-One. Ron, you talked about how much you enjoyed writing that last chapter of the book, but were there any other moments, maybe moments from that season, that you most enjoyed revisiting when you were writing your memoir?
Well, yeah, 1969, you guys are a couple of young people, and I don't know that you can have a feel for what it was like in America in 1968, 1969, okay? The war in Vietnam was raging. The economy was roaring because of wartime money, and everybody's working. Everybody had some money, and if you had a way to get out of the army, because it was all conscription back then, it was a pretty good time. But a lot of people didn't have that, a way out of the service back during a very unpopular war. And it was a rise of civil rights. It was the rise of identity politics, gay rights, women's rights. It was a time when everything seemed possible. Everything seemed to be happening in those times. And it was, the tragedy of Dr. Martin Luther King being assassinated and Bobby Kennedy. And I'll tell you, I feel like the loss of Bobby Kennedy was maybe one of our last chances to rally around something that everybody could agree, ending the war and treating all people equally. I felt like he had the message, but it never came to pass. I think he would have been the next president because I think his campaign, he was stepping up to it. It was a very incredible time. And I went on, after the 69 and 68 seasons, I went on USO tours to Vietnam. So I got a pretty in-depth look at what we were doing over there to that country. And, another one of our wars that were, on false pretenses. But it was an incredible time to be young and have a few bucks in your pocket. That's for sure.
So, having grown up in Baltimore, what was the feeling like having to go up against the Orioles in the World Series in '69?
Yeah, that was incredible, because I had, first worked out in Memorial Stadium as an amateur. And you put that Baltimore Orioles uniform on, and I was a big Oriole fan, of course, growing up in Baltimore County in Sparrows Point. Sparrows Point was the home of a large, what they call Tidewater Steel Plant, Bethlehem Steel. They employed 35,000 people. My dad worked in the automobile business as a service salesman, mechanic, service salesman, service manager. He didn't work in the point, but I had uncles that did, and it was a big part of our existence there. Okay, and you were all Oriole fans. Everybody was an Oriole fan. I was a big Brooks Robinson fan because he was a young player who came up and, stumbled a little when he first came to the big leagues, and then all of a sudden was there as their third baseman forever. And you had to love him. And my dad in the winter worked with Gus Triandos, who played for the Orioles. And, I had played against their Double-A team my first year in organized baseball in 1964. So I knew Earl Weaver as a manager in the minor league, and now he's running the show for the Orioles. And here we are in Memorial Stadium where, you got your first taste of what it felt like to be in a big league uniform. So it was strange. And that little kid inside there in me, when I ran on that field, that little kid in there who was 9, 10, 12 years old, watching the Orioles, he's in there as well. And his eyes are big as saucers. And I was as nervous as I could possibly be. You wanted to do good. This was going to be a great chance to show your stuff. And we wanted to show our stuff against the Orioles, even though we were huge underdogs back then, the New York Mets.
Ron, I have to ask this follow-up before we, transition to, modern day baseball, the Mets and the Yankees. But
Sure.
You mentioned how big of a Brooks Robinson fan you were. You make that catch off him in Game 4. What was that feeling like, stealing a hit off of someone you used to look up to?
It is such a coincidence, and that's what life is a lot of times. It's a lot of coincidence, or as somebody said, one damn thing after another, and the fact that I had met Orioles, I had been in their clubhouse as an amateur working out with them before I signed with the New York Mets, and now you're in a World Series with them. But I had worked so hard because I came to the big leagues a little too young. They rushed a couple of us to the big leagues. And you make a lot of mistakes in front of a lot of people, and you have to figure out how to deal with that. And I played for Casey Stengel in 1965. That was the first manager I played for in the big leagues. So, and you're not ready to play in the big leagues when you come up after one season in the minors. They did that to protect a bunch of us under the rules that existed at the time to keep us in the organization. The Orioles center fielder, Paul Blair, was in the Mets organization, and they failed to protect him under those existing rules. And after the first year, the Orioles grabbed him. And I think the Mets overreacted, and they kept 4 of us in the big leagues in '65, me and Tug McGraw and 2 other players that didn't play a whole lot in the big leagues. But you got there. I got there too soon and made a lot of mistakes. And I started working on myself as an outfielder, taking a lot of line drives and ground balls. I didn't take a whole lot of fly balls. You could chase those down in batting practice. But I wanted to work on fly balls that were hard to read and plays that you had to make when you needed to make them. Ground ball, trying to come to the ball hard and come up with it and try to throw somebody out or stop them from taking an extra base. That was important to me, and I worked hard at it. And it is so ironic in my mind now that I end up making a play that I think is directly connected to all that work that I put in. And I made it against a guy who was my favorite as an Oriole in Brooks Robinson.
Yeah, it's such a great story there. I do want to transition, to this modern day Mets team. We just saw them take 2 games against the
Sure.
Yankees. I feel like it's way too hard to compare any team, let alone the Miracle Mets, to any Mets team now. But do you see any similarities from that special run you guys had to this modern day team?
Well, I think when they get to Grom back, and it sounds like he's going to be up and ready in another couple of weeks to start for the Mets, that pitching staff is going to start to take on a little bit of shape that it didn't have without him. Looks like Max Scherzer's healthy and back, and we were a pitching staff surrounded by some mostly young players with a couple of vets mixed in. Don Clendenin joined the team in late June, and gave us experience and a right-handed hitter with power at first base. But for the most part, we were a pretty young team in 1969. And if you look at what we were doing through, well into May, we were bubbling around 500, not doing much of anything, and looking like, hey, for that organization, bubbling around 500 was progress, because I played on Met teams games every year. And so we weren't setting the world on fire, but we were making steady progress. And then May into June, we reeled off 11 straight wins. And that's when the Met management, I think, opened their eyes and said, wait a minute, these guys just vaulted into relevance. So maybe we need to make that deal for another hitter, and they got Clendenin without giving up a bunch of young pitching, which was, I think, really key. You got a guy who could play, mainly against left-handers, but he was a veteran guy who knew how to play the game, and so from there we started proving to ourselves that we could play, and we chased the Cubs into August, and near the end of August, the Cubs faltered. And when they faltered, we were at the peak of our run on the year. We're winning 3 out of 4 games, and the Cubs went on about a 10 or 11 game stretch where they couldn't hit themselves in the butt with both hands. And we rolled by them. We rolled by them, and never looked back.
So how has the Subway Series itself changed, since you've played?
Well, now, I think it's, some people will dispute it, but you get the Mets against the Yankees in the regular season, it's like playoff time, okay, in New York. I mean, I almost said Shea Stadium, Taylor. I do without thinking. It's Citi Field, and it was rocking, and it has been rocking because everybody knew when you put a team on the field that was competitive in New York, after the ups and downs of the Mets over the years, we knew that Met fans would come out of the woodwork, and they did, and have, to support this team this year that I thought was an indication that they want to be in the hunt. And it isn't perfect. I'd love to see another bat in the lineup. I feel like sometimes they struggle to score runs, but they looked pretty impressive and got enough pitching against the Yankees. And even after they gave up the 2-run lead in game 2 of that series, they didn't lose any energy and came back and threatened in the 8th and scored in the 9th and walked it off, and that's after, banging them around a little bit in game 1 and winning by 3 runs. So I think in media now that is so extensive, just the idea that I'm sitting here talking to you on Zoom, and this is not the time I've ever done it, so the media has expanded in such a way, and as it relates to sports and politics and everything else in our lives, and it is amazing, and it's I think it enlarges everything. These guys make millions of dollars, and yet they got to go out there and play a game that we know very well. We played it for a lot less money, but we still played it the same way. And when you see a team like the Mets, it looks like they put the ball in play. They pretty good two-strike approaches, and guys that look like they're having fun and rooting for one another. You watch what happens when a guy, gets a sacrifice fly or gets a runner over or bunts a guy over like Nito did last night to get the run in scoring position, to third base, and how he is received when he goes in the dugout. This is a team that looks like it's having fun playing, and I like them. I like them. And I think they're going to get better with DeGrom. And, they got a couple other arms in the pen who I think are going to be important. May's coming back, and, they're going to get a little healthier. And I think, I would be hugely upset if they're not in the playoff picture. I think they're poised for that.
You talk about the playoff picture, on the other side of things, outside of Queens, you go to the Bronx. The Yankees, they're way ahead of first place in the entire MLB at the All-Star break. They've looked like they've begun to slip. They lose 2 games to the Mets. Should they still be considered World Series favorites? And how close are the Mets there to being right alongside them for a potential ring?
Yeah, I think, the Yankees have obviously shown so much more offense. And it's a good team, and they've made good decisions. And I know they handled Aaron Judge a little bit in that too. He bopped them first time up for a home run, and then all of a sudden they quieted him up a little bit. And I think they figured, they know, everybody knows how to pitch everybody else. Everybody knows where your weaknesses are. In the game today, so they look at so much video and so much coaching. And you almost have too much information, but they know they know how they want to pitch guys. It's just whether you can execute or not. But the amount of information they have now in Major League Baseball, in professional baseball, the amount of information is daunting. Okay. These guys that can take what they need from that and get themselves up there with all of the media attention and all the pressure on them, I have a lot of admiration for them, because I think it's harder to play now. I think there's more better arms in Major League Baseball now than there were when we played. I really believe that. I think it's harder to hit. It's harder to play the game at that level. I have a lot of admiration for these guys. It ain't easier to play in the big league. And, it isn't easy to, it isn't easy to go out there every day like a Lindor or Escobar and those guys, Alonso. I love where Pete Alonso is as a hitter right now. He's just, it looks to me like he's trying to hit the ball hard on the line, up the middle, left center, right center. I like where he's at as a hitter. I think he did the smartest thing. He didn't look like he changed his stroke for the home run hitting contest, and it hurt him a little bit in that. But you know what? It didn't bother me at all. I said, I want Pete to stay where he is as the hitter. He's never been, in my book, more effective than he is right now, and tougher to pitch to.
Mm-hmm. And just to wrap up, just last night, the Yankees acquired Andrew Benintendi from the Royals. How will this move impact the team as we head into the second half of the season?
Geez, I guess the answer, and I'm dodging you here, Taylor, it depends. What's he going to do for them? Will he fit in? Will he, obviously they're making smart moves. Here's a team that, they're running away with their division, and that can be dangerous in itself. Sometimes too big a lead. You come down the stretch, you're going to play games at the end of the season. You win by 12 games. That's almost 2 weeks where you play games that don't matter, and in the process, you can lose your edge, a little bit. All of a sudden now, you're going to the playoffs and you're resting guys and everybody's fresh. But if you rest people too much and they lose that edge of knowing they got to go out there every day, I'd be careful with that.
Once again, World Series champion Rob Swoboda. Ron, thank you so much for joining us. Brought us a lot of Yankees, Mets, a lot of memories. So I really appreciate you taking out your time.
Well, it was fun talking to you guys. I hope I see you at the playoffs. It'll be fun. And I hope the Mets are involved. They certainly look like a playoff team. And you know, I watch as many of their games as I can on MLB Extra Innings. So I'm a fan. And I'll be up there for Old Timers Day and revel a little bit in our history at the end of August. That's going to be a great time.
Should be very exciting. Hopefully we get a Subway Series. We'll cross our fingers about that. Be sure to stay tuned. One-on-one will be right back on 90.7 FM and YouTube Live.